Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Social Housing Roundtable. Today I'm joined by the fantastic Hannah Harvey, and we're going to be discussing LGBTQ plus acceptance in social housing at the end of LGBTQ plus History Month. We're going to have some amazing guests. I'm really looking forward to this episode. Sit back, listen and enjoy. Thank you. Good morning, good morning, good morning.
Morning.
Hello everybody, how are we?
All good.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people are finishing off meetings and quickly jumping on, judging by how people are jumping in at the last moment here. So
yeah, I include myself in that, sorry.
Oh, don't worry at all. It's not a problem. Yeah, nice to have everybody with us on obviously a really important day. I suppose yesterday was really the end of LGBTQ plus History Month.
It was.
And it's nice to have seen it's got some really decent traction on LinkedIn this year, I felt, like in terms of other platforms as well. It felt like it's actually had more of a voice this year.
I think it has on LinkedIn. I think it's always had quite a good voice on Twitter, if I'm honest. But I think because LinkedIn is growing that kind of, place where you can professionally share things, I think. But Twitter, I think probably for a couple of years now, has had quite good traction on it. But I think it's because of some of the people you've got on Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter I find and Facebook as well as always does well with those two. But I agree with you, LinkedIn, I think for so long people are like, oh, you can't talk about this, or that's not business and that kind of stuff. And actually these things are business. They are important to what culture and to what business is all about. So I feel it's really important. Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Hannah Harvey. I'm the Executive Director of Operations at Saffron Housing Trust, which is a community-based provider in Norfolk, Suffolk, a little bit of Cambridge and a little bit of Essex as well.
Fantastic. And obviously we want to come together today to talk about LGBTQ plus History Month, but also more importantly about its impact in social housing. And it's an interesting one. We've got another roundtable coming up in a few weeks about a carers network. I think there's a lot of things that we take for granted, that because we support people in different communities in housing, immediately we're accepting of all cultures. It's not always the way. So I'll pass over to you to kind of open up the discussion, really.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting or difficult when you talk about these things. Obviously, you're often talking about personal experience for yourself, and you're sharing a part of yourself which is not always one that you perhaps want to share or feel like you should have to share. And also, I think it's that interesting dynamic of actually, it's not what you want to be known as. You want to be known as Hannah Harvey, a person. You don't want to be known as having a qualifying feature for certain things. So I think it's quite difficult how you manage and measure and deal that message when you're talking about it. So I think it's quite conversational, if I'm truly honest. I think that social housing for a long time actually has had a really strong voice in this particular part. I think that it's got a lot of traction around equality within the workplace for LGBTQ plus community, and also for champions of that, friends of that. I think it's got a long way to go, but that's not to say that it hasn't done an immense amount of work already. I think that there's two parts to it. I think there's professionals like myself, who's a gay female who works within the industry, but there's also the element of our tenants that are part of us, and we have to understand the impact it has upon our tenants. And if we really understand what we're doing as a sector to support our tenants, and if there's more we can do, and I absolutely think there is, and I don't think that just stands for...
Shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up.
LGBT.
You all are fucking faggots, bro. Shut the fuck up.
What the hell? Cow?
What the hell? Who was that?
Very charming man.
Yeah,
Oh my
I will.
goodness me.
It's fine, I've faced worse.
Oh my apologies
days.
massively. That I've never, in 2 years of doing these.
What is he doing in this meeting then?
I don't know, he's going.
Apologies.
Don't worry. It's good.
No, let's carry on with that meeting.
It's good to have somebody like that because it challenges it. It shows it's still a real issue, isn't it?
And it does, and this is exactly it. We are in a world where there's still this horrendous. I'm so sorry, Hannah, and obviously.
No, don't worry. It's okay. Honestly, it's fine. I've been a serving frontline police officer. I faced far worse than that.
No, absolutely fair. Sorry,
but I did lose my train of thought there. Obviously,
absolutely.
I think I was about sharing an experience with tenants and how we can assist tenants. I think, and I don't think that just stands for LGBTQ plus. I think that also stands for any diversity, equality, ED&I statement factor. I think there's lots that we can do, and I think it doesn't just stop with EDI. I think it stops with other things as well, as caring, educational attainment, and things like that. So I think it's a much bigger picture, but I do think housing actually leads the way in a lot of those things. I mean, like I've already alluded to, I've worked across multiple sectors, public sector as a serving police officer, I worked in children's services for a time. And I think that if I compare my professional experience in both of those to what I've received since I've been into housing, they're not comparable. Actually, the housing sector is a far more welcoming environment. I found it much easier. Some of that may be due to timing, though, if I'm honest, as I've got older and we've progressed as a country and as a society and understood the impact. I think that's helped, but sort of without giving away my age, but I'm now going to 20 odd years ago when I joined the police service at 18 and a half. That was a very different experience. And it wasn't because they were overtly homophobic, because they really weren't. They really did try and help and support out members of their team, but it was difficult, it was challenging, and it was a learning process for the police at the time, and the same for children's services. But I have to say to both of those as well, they've come an awful long way, and I think they've come a long way because actually they've started to listen to people within the organisations who have really got a strong voice. I think that from a housing perspective, what I think you find unilaterally in housing, it's a really caring sector where people join this organisation because they really, really want to make a difference, and they want to make a difference in a positive way. And that goes across all of it. That isn't just about housing. That's about the team and the members that work within housing, but also our tenants who we want to support, and actually our wider stakeholders who we can try and help and assist if we possibly can. I think we do have a lot more work to do to understand how we can assist our tenants. And I think the call earlier, there's a gentleman that was very polite earlier on in this particular call, it kind of shows what we're still facing on a daily basis and how we can make our tenants and our team members feel safe and secure within an environment to make sure they don't feel like they'll be treated any differently. Do we consider how when we have extra care schemes, older independent living plus schemes, generationally people feel about disclosing to a carer, for example, that they are of that LGBTQ plus. Have we considered that? Have we considered actually how if we have a female who was born male, he's actually can I I don't know what I share and what I don't share. How comfortable do they feel in the environment? And I think we have a long way to go to do that. I think open, honest conversations really help. And I think that we're getting better at that. And I think platforms like this, Matt, actually really help and encourage that, because it gives people the opportunity to ask questions which they might be afraid to ask normally. But I also think it gives people...
I think it's good to just get the voice out and show that it is something we need to talk about. And as you say, the gentleman highlights exactly it, in the fact there's so much prejudice going on. There's so many areas, and the amount of times that we've talked about on these roundtables about diversity, about other things, and often we focus on either gender or race, and actually there are 9 protected characteristics within diversity, and this is absolutely one of them. And if someone feels empowered enough to just pop onto this today and vocalise as that gentleman did before, then what are we saying to our residents? What voice do our residents have, and what voice do those who work in housing and the sector which does care so much have to make more of an impact there?
I think that's right. I think I mean, I'm lucky. I'm married. My wife and I've got 4 children. So we've got a daughter and 3 sons. And it was interesting because my daughter started 6th form this year, actually. So she's finished high school and she went to 6th form. And she said, and I hadn't even thought about it, to be honest, but she said to me on the day she started 6th form that she was really anxious. And I said, why? Just like, well, Mum, and my daughter would identify as being a straight female at this moment in her life. I mean, I think gender's fluid and sexuality is fluid. And I think that applies to a lot of people about this moment. That's how she identifies. She's got a boyfriend. And she said to me, I feel like when I go to a new place and I start a new school, I have to come out about my parents. And I was like, that's really, it had not even entered my conscience that my 17-year-old daughter, when she started a new place, had to tell people that, I better just say that my mum's a gay, because I don't know quite how people might react to that. And interestingly, her boyfriend, we had to tell, when she had to tell his parents about her mum, that was a horrible experience for Sienna. She was quite worried and nervous about it. I mean, they were fine and they were lovely, and it wasn't an issue, and they dealt with it as in the majority of the world do, to be perfectly fair. But it was a stressful thing, and I think actually we sometimes forget that it's not just me, it's not just my wife, is it? We've got 4 kids that impacts on, and I've got 3 boys actually. I'm fortunate to have 3 boys. And it impacts them. My 14-year-old is a really talented footballer. He's in the Norwich City elite system, and he is frequently confronted with homophobic language as part of his everyday footballing. He was at football last night and somebody called him, you're so fucking gay. And he's like, well, No, well, actually, I'm not though, am I? And my parents don't actually find that really offensive that you've said that to me. What? Because you're not saying that in any other way other than a derogatory way. It's language. Language is our barrier at the minute. And I think there's a big part to play where we can just re-educate people with the use of language, because, you know, you wouldn't say that about other protected characteristics, and nor should we accept it in any form of discriminatory behaviour. And I think, I'm a massive football fan myself, and I went to watch Liverpool v Chelsea at Wembley on Sunday. Very good if you're a Liverpool fan and anything about football, because we won. Woo! But I was in the crowd, and it obviously gets passionate and fire. And I'm one of those. I get really passionate and fire about football. My son's live, breathe, and die. Football is life in our house. But this guy behind me for probably 90 minutes kept screaming how Chelsea players were a bunch of rent boys. And I turned to him and I just said, I'm sorry, of what in any way, shape or form, how is that acceptable? I've got a 9-year-old little boy sitting there and a 14-year-old boy, one for one. And two, that is wholly unacceptable language, and it's homophobic. The first time I heard it, I thought, well, I'm not quite sure if I heard it right. But after like the third time, I was like, that is not acceptable. So I turned around and asked him to leave. Now, the pleasing thing was, from my perspective, is that a lot of people around me said, thank you and well done, and gave me a little clap. Now, he didn't leave, he moved to the back of the way. Now, he might have continued to chant it, but I didn't hear it anymore. But I felt like actually it's our duty to confront people with the language that they use. He doesn't know what he's saying. He doesn't know how offensive that is. And actually how completely unacceptable it is in this day and age to stand on the football terrace even and scream and shout things like that. And I think
I had something similar. I'm a Plymouth Argyle fan, and they were playing Birmingham City recently, so I actually got to get to a game, which was nice. And now living obviously in Birmingham, and you know, I had some friends coming up from Plymouth. Now, Plymouth is a very naval city. It is very, very military in the way that some of the language and things is used. And for the first time ever in an FA Cup third round, there was a female referee. All right, great. Amazing. You know, yes, okay, it's a step forward, but it's just, but immediately you heard stuff going through, and a couple of friends who I met from Plymouth were making jokes and things like that. I just kind of looked and didn't laugh, and they went very kind of sheepish. But it's about everybody kind of calling each other out, and I you know, bringing it kind of right back through to the social housing world. The language that, you know, a housing officer or whoever we have within our you know, directors, you know, frontline to top.
Absolutely.
It's about whatever language they're using in personal lives, in terms of slurs they might not see as slurs, whatever that might look like. It's so important, because you don't know.
You don't know the impact.
A, it's not acceptable to use anyway, but B, you don't know who you actually is going to be hearing that might be massively offended. I'm aware, by the way, there is somebody in the waiting room. I'm trying to find out who they are before letting them in after that, and because it's VC 5857, and I don't have anything like obviously we had before.
I just think language is the thing I would implore people to consider, because language is really key in making people feel included and excluded as well. And again, coming back to social housing, that isn't just about a sexuality, a gender, any of the other protected characteristics. That's just about inclusivity and making people feel part of something. And, you know, it's not difficult to make sure that we use words that are caring and considerate. And actually, also, I always say I'm never offended if somebody asks me a question because they don't understand. I would rather they ask the question than they kind of talked about it in a way that's kind of not behind your back, but in a kind of like, oh, you know, is she, isn't she, or has she got a husband? Or quite often people do assume I have a husband. You know, I have got 4 children, and they straight away say to me, what does your husband do? And I find myself, as I've got older and more comfortable and confident in my skin, I came out when I was 17, so I'm 40 now. It's quite a long time ago, but that's taken me a long time to feel comfortable with who I am. And I find now that as I've got older, I just tell people straight away, well, actually, my wife she's training to be a therapist. Before that, she worked in children's services, you know, and we have 4 children. And whereas before I would have danced around that subject and spoke about they do this or they do that, and I've kind of spent a long time figuring out if it was comfortable enough space for me to be able to share that. Now, what I would say is I've worked for some really inclusive organisations in the housing sector, and Hanover was one of those, a fantastic flagship actually, and now Saffron, Victory Housing Trust, actually all of the housing providers I've worked with have been really, really inclusive employees, and I always felt comfortable enough to actually probably share that part of myself quite early on in that journey. But I've also been in jobs where I wouldn't, you know, I didn't share that about myself for a long time when I was in the police service, and I didn't share it when I was in children's services because I was worried and nervous because I was young and I didn't understand the reaction that I was going to get. But being somewhere where you feel comfortable and you're made to feel comfortable instantaneously, I think as well, though, as I've got probably older, I've controlled that narrative myself. So as I felt more comfortable in my own skin, I felt much more able to say that about myself in the beginning. So I will talk about my wife, Amy. I will talk about my children. And I found that actually by being confident enough to do that, it kind of dispels that kind of twittering behind your back when people are like, is she, isn't she, do it, you know,
what do you feel like the housing sector as a whole needs to do to, and this is me asking you, and then we're going to kind of open it up to the wider conversation with, but what do you think we need to be doing? Because like you said, there are some flagship organisations that are absolutely brilliant, and actually there are a number of people who I know wanted to kind of join today that were also members of the community that unfortunately due to timings, you know, that's the way these things fall. But there's still the housing sector is so vast, and I mean, we talked about football. It's a bit like football. There will be far more members of the community that than ever would talk about openly, I think, as they do, as you are doing so confidently. Thank you for doing so today.
You have to make people feel safe. And I mean, House Proud is a fantastic organisation that does an awful lot of really positive work, but people need to feel safe and secure. And actually, people need to feel like if they want to share it, they can. And if they don't, that's also okay, because, you know, there's not an expectation that a heterosexual person walks into a workplace and tells everybody that they're heterosexual. So why is there an expectation that it works the other way? You know, actually, why should I have to say? You know, I always come back to this point that whilst I'm comfortable doing it, why should I have to? What relevance is it to my professional abilities that I'm in a same-sex couple? It makes no difference, does it? It makes no difference to my ability to do my job. Actually, when I complete an application form, whilst I appreciate the need for us to gather statistics that we're being representative of people, when I'm filling an job application, why do I need to put down qualifying features about myself? Why is it important organisationally that I'm in a same-sex couple? Why do they need to know about my religious beliefs, my ethnicity? I'm not sure I always understand when you're in that job process, what is the relevance? Because surely you should be judged as a person on your own merits, not about your qualifying features. And I think that I find frustrating. Now that may be different for everybody. That's my personal view, and I accept that's my personal view. So other people feel that it's important that we share that information. But for me, I don't understand why being a gay female has any influence on why I'm applying for a job.
Therein lies, I agree with you. On one side of it, you want to be able to show that diversity piece, and completely agree. But as you say, on the flip side, it's a difficult balance.
I mean, it's interesting other people's thoughts, actually, because I often stand on my low. I had this conversation with my board very recently, and I was very much on my own when I had this conversation, because they're like, yes, but we need to know that we're representative of people. And I'm like, yeah, but find out once they work for you if it's that important. I mean, what difference does it make when someone's applying for a job? Shouldn't you be looking at their qualifications to make sure they're qualified, not anything else? I don't know what other people think, but it's an interesting point. And that's the sort of thing I think we need to start talking about and challenging as a sector. Really, do we really need to gather that information? Actually, we are holding really confidential, important information on people. And actually, I speak a lot about...
And there's people who aren't even working for us because that's the application stage.
Exactly. And, you know, I speak about our tenants and how we want to best help them, but actually it shouldn't matter, should it? My point is always this: it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter because they should get the same level of servants irrelevant. And I think that's the bit we've got to get to, and not just in housing, as a society worldwide. And I don't just mean this country. I think, you know, across the world.
And like I said, the way you do that is to make people feel safe. But then if we don't have the conversations, people don't feel safe, and it's this. But I'm glad we're doing it. Cordelia, please, come in.
I used to agree with you.
Did you?
I used to think, why do I have to tell? But I don't know if you noticed, but I'm a Black woman. But I don't agree with you because I think organisations need to understand the work they need to do.
Yeah, that's a good challenge. That is a very fair challenge.
Yeah, and they ask because they need to sort out what's going on inside. Yeah, so yes, it would, if we lived in a perfect society, then it shouldn't matter. But the reality is, within a lot of organisations, it does matter. They say it don't, but it does. And therefore work has to be done. And that's why I no longer agree with you, because I've been turned down for too many jobs once they realise I'm a Black woman, or worse still, I'm a Black disabled woman.
Right.
Yeah. And therefore they need to know what the work they need to do, how much work they need to do. And they need to understand the importance not only of diversity, visual or otherwise, but diversity of thought. And we do need to move away from the male, pale and stale. And if we don't do that challenging, we're going to stick with that because they're comfortable with that. It's easy. Society.
My question back then would be, at what point do you feel it is acceptable to be asked about those kind of things? Do you feel like it is when you are applying for the role in the first place because some businesses need to positively discriminate in order to make sure they're being more diverse for their residents
positive discrimination is illegal in this country anyway. So, but they do need to take positive action. They do need to take positive action. And we've been at Stonewater, we were recently having a debate about whether or not we anonymize applications and we don't do this. But actually, I feel anonymizing applications is passing the responsibility onto the applicant. So you want me to come, and at Stonewater we have this big thing about bring your whole self to work. You can be your whole self. We're really inclusive and we're really working on creating a diverse and inclusive organization. So if at the time we're looking to recruit, we're saying we want you not to be yourself, we want you to hide who you are so that we can be sure we haven't discriminated. Well, we're passing the responsibility onto you. We're not taking responsibility for what's going on inside, because actually you've come in as an anonymous person and then you get in and we realize, oh, you're gay, or oh, you're black, or oh, you're disabled. Have we dealt with the institutional discrimination or the direct discrimination? No. So you've now come into an organization that has a problem that I haven't even started to deal with because they anonymized the application because they wanted it to be fair. That doesn't work for me. The work starts inside. So if it means that you have to identify who you are, and we take you for who you are, lock, stock and barrel, all of you, and we do the work inside, then that's important. And the only way we can ensure we're doing it is to be able to make sure that we are recruiting the best regardless of who you are. But that means we know who you are before you come into the organization. And when you come into the organization, you join us and you help us do that work.
I think it's a really compelling argument either way. I think, if I'm honest, it comes down to personal preference. So I choose not to share it. I choose not to share it. It's actually my choice not to, and I feel strongly about that, and I think that's okay because that's my choice. And I come back to actually it should be a choice. So
and I agree with you. It should be a choice. What I don't agree with is people who just leave the box blank. There should be that prefer not to say that. People who leave the box blank, they're not opting out. They're just being. I just think they're being a little bit difficult because we can't tell whether you decided you didn't want to share or because you're just apathetic. And
I mean, I always tick the box that says I don't want to share it, basically. Prefer not to say. That's what I always tick, and because that's my active choice. But I genuinely believe there's compelling arguments either way, and I can see it from the side of it as an executive why it's important and why we want to do it. But from a personal perspective, it's probably one of my things that I feel strongly about that I don't want to do. I think I remember being 20 and I was in the police and I was on accelerated promotion, and a very old school sergeant said to me, well, you'll be fine, won't you? You're a woman and you're gay, so you're bound to get promoted. And from that moment on, it completely shook me professionally to the core, because I spent the rest of my then professional career for a good 20 years feeling like, bloody hell, I hope that's not why I'm promoted. I hope I'm promoted on merit, and actually undermined my professional confidence, because all I kept hearing was this voice in the back of my head saying, well, you will do, won't you, because you tick the boxes. And that is probably why I feel the way I feel, because I'm like, actually, I don't want to share that part of me, because I don't want people to think that I've got somewhere because of that. Now, what I would say is that as I've got older, I've reclaimed that narrative, like, actually, no, this is a big part of who I am, and actually I can't change the system if I fight against the system by having that part of myself that's doubting myself. Actually, what I should do is be confident and comfortable and share my experience and change it from within. And I think that's what's happened to me in the last probably only 5 years, if I'm really honest. But it took me a long time to get over that, because I was only 20 when someone said that to me, and I was still a child at 20. I didn't know what I wanted to do half the time, and it really took a long time for me to understand that. it was undermining of my confidence, wasn't it? It was undermining my confidence.
I get that, but I've had to have that confidence. I haven't had the option to be able to choose whether or not I want to share. So I've always got to feel like I'm the best, and knowing I'm the best and still not being able to get my foot in the door.
Yeah, it must be frustrating, it must be horrible. I can't begin to imagine.
So if I can create an opportunity for somebody like me to get their foot in the door, what they do once they're in the door is up to them, but to give them the opportunity to get that foot in the door is really important. And therefore that monitoring information is really important for me to be able to make that argument that, hold on a minute, there are some great people who you're not even looking at.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with any of it. I genuinely don't. Like I said, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there's a divide, there's a debate. Some people feel the way I feel, and some people feel the way you feel. And I think you can move. I think that's fluid. I think that will change over time. Sometimes I feel like it, sometimes I don't. And I completely understand the merits of that. Absolutely, it's important for us to understand. I think, like I said, Matt, I think it's personal choice, and I think as an individual, you have to make people feel empowered and comfortable to make those personal choices. What is best for them, and then the organisation should absolutely do all it can to make sure we're enabling people to feel empowered so they can be the person that they want to be. And that some of that, I do agree, does come from collecting that information, but some of that also comes from the culture within the organisation to make people feel comfortable, and actually culturally and socially from the sector itself, about making people feel comfortable about being in an environment where they don't feel like that part of them is a reason why they don't have a job, or it stops them progressing, or they will be treated differently, or and looking at how we word things and how we put things into policies. I went through our parenting policy not that long ago, and it said in there about mum and dad. Now we have two mums. Also, you have adoptive parents. Also, you have two dads. You have single parents. It shouldn't say mum and dad. It should say parent, because that's what we all are. We are parents. The fact that I'm a male or female is irrelevant in that, isn't it? We're just a parent. So why can we not just have generic language?
Yeah, I did. I read something really bizarre the other day actually on that, though, that if you still look at any school sign in the UK, it's always a female. Never a male with their kid. It's always a female. And yet I'd never noticed it. And my partner had never noticed it. And she kind of went, hang on, that's mad. Just as a quick show of hands, or feel free to kind of raise your hand with the thing. Any businesses here do anything for LGBTQ plus History Month? Is there anything, even if it was just shared a post on LinkedIn or got actively involved in some way? Stonewater did, Cordelia.
Yeah, we did.
We've been blogging internally, sharing lived experiences. Every year we do something. It's not as big as what we would do for Pride, but we make sure we acknowledge it. We've got an LGBTQ plus employee networking group called Spectrum, who are pretty active. We gave them the opportunity to make the decision as to whether or not we put a lot of resources into LGBT History Month, or whether we put a lot of resources into Pride, and they chose Pride.
That's absolutely fair.
Yeah, but we do make sure that we acknowledge LGBT History Month. We've got EDI calendar, which everyone gets a copy of, and it highlights both Pride and LGBT History Month, as well as other occasions. So we make sure we use it as a also.
I know that obviously Saffron did, Hannah. Did anybody else do anything? Any other businesses? Was there anything posted? Just interested. I mean, Hazel, I know you've been on some of these before with me. I mean, would you have liked to have seen Bromford doing more for it, or is it just not something? What do you think's been the decision around that? Not to cast blame, it's just an interesting one.
Sure. I think at the beginning of the month we made some posts and then it just fizzled out. And that's all I can say. I think we actually kind of recognised the beginning of it, but we certainly didn't do anything active in the period, and we didn't celebrate the end either. So I think there's definite work to do there, and I can take that back.
It's an interesting one, because I personally didn't post an awful lot about it, and yet been a member and I've known people in the members and all the rest of it. And I kind of look at things and go, well, why didn't I? And maybe I don't know whether it's just the impact of the story or what's being shared, but then I think about the voices I could maybe help if I did. it's how those voices are shared when you have got the voice and the means to do so.
I think as well, Matt, you've got to consider the current political world that we're living in, and there's an awful lot of things going on which are very, very, as humanitarian effort, humanitarians people speaking, are just really quite distressing for everybody to see and be part of. You see what's going on in Ukraine and Russia, and it's painful.
It's
actually,
really hit home, hasn't it?
It's really hit home for a lot of people, and you also know that in a lot of those countries, LGBTQ plus people are significantly persecuted and made to feel like pariahs, quite frankly. And I think that you worry what's going to happen. We make 100 strides forward, and then you see what's going on, and you realise that the war is much more than just Putin trying to claim land. This will have a much larger social and emotional and moral complexity to it, should he be successful, which I really hope he is, in overthrowing the Ukrainian government, because I think that you will start to see that the spread of his somewhat unpleasant views. I'm trying to think of a polite word.
No, very well played.
There is no polite way of saying it. There's no polite way of saying it.
It's just hate.
Yeah, it is just hate. And
I just sat with bated breath and went, well played, unpleasant.
I was really scrambling for a word that didn't have some expletive in it, to be honest. But
I think we would all have supported it had you gone down that route.
I was trying to remain professional.
Have you got, is there something that you yourselves are doing within LG, or have you noticed any sharing or anything this month?
So Matt, who was that question directed
Sorry,
at?
to yourself. I just thought you come off mute. I didn't know if you're jumping in.
I'll be honest with you, you think it would be actually interesting to me, but I'm a bit like one of the other participants who said that I think that our organisation did the whole, posting stuff at the beginning of the month and then lost enthusiasm with it. There's so many things that take our attention as a sector, and this is not one that got an awful lot of traction.
And in terms of, I guess, with residents or staff, do you feel that more, is something like, and Hannah, maybe you can, or anybody else can jump in this, how important is celebrating this month that we've just had?
I think we need to remember how far we've come historically in this country, and there were some really punitive laws not that long ago that we're still, particularly people that were in social housing, had to face because of sexuality. And I think it's a real shame. I mean, I think Pride is amazing, and absolutely, we all get behind Pride, and as we should, because it's a celebration, and that's important, because you should celebrate. But I do think there's a real place in our country, in our world, for this month, because I think actually we underestimate just how far we've come. It wasn't that long ago that same-sex marriage was legalized. It wasn't that long ago that people who were in the same sex would have shared tendency. It wasn't that long ago that actually to say you weren't allowed to teach about gay relationships within an education environment,
And
there are all these things
stopped in some places now.
Exactly, there are all those things that actually are really important pieces of time in history, and modern history. You're talking about modern, it was still illegal for men to enter into a same-sex relationship, and people were in the 60s being put into prison because of it. So I think we need to really look at how far we've come. I think what it also does, it shines a light on how far you've got to go still. So we see all these tiny little steps that we've made, which are amazingly important and have really changed this country's manner, but there is also an awful lot that still has to happen. I've got 4 children, my wife and I have carried those, we've all carried, I've carried 1, my wife carried 3, because I'll be honest, I'm a terrible pregnant person, it didn't suit me, so she was much better doing it than I was. We had that luxury of choosing, but in the hospital I was given a badge that said on it dad, and they crossed the word dad out and put parent, and I was like, how, that was in 2017. Wow. They crossed out parent, wow. They crossed out dad and put parent, and on the form, isn't it dreadful? And on the form, as I was discharged to take Amy and my youngest home, Reggie, they did it again. They crossed it out dad, and I had to sign it. On our children's birth certificate, it has me as mother or Amy as mother, and then underneath it, other parent. Well, why can't it just be 2 mothers, or can't we both be parents? I don't understand. And this is the sort of things that we need to still just move and change, because words hurt. Like, they say sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. But they do. They really, really do. And words can often leave far lasting, longer damage, I think, than sometimes a physical thing. How that guy behaved earlier, that I dare say that will pop into my head at some point in the next few days again. I think, oh, bloody hell, I thought we'd got past all of that. Of course it will, because it's words and it's painful, because it's meant to hurt. And I think that's why I keep talking about language, and actually what we can do is language. And I think History Month enables us to really focus on some of those smaller things that we've changed, but that we could still change further.
I totally agree with you.
Oh, Completely agree. Amy, let me bring you in. I was just going to ask you a question in a moment as well, but yeah, Amy, do come in. I was just wondering on that, when you are doing on your resident forms and on sign-ups, are there those distinguishing then? Is it kind of like if we have a family moving in with children, is it resident 1, resident 2, or is it mum, dad,
We put tenant 1, tenant 2. We have lead tenant, secondary tenant, so we don't have qualifying. Yeah, that's how we do it. I mean, I don't think
things like that that make a
they've done it for a while.
Yes, we do that tenant 1, tenant 2.
Yeah,
it's little things like that that make a difference. Amy, thanks for joining us. Please come in.
Yeah, no worries. Nice to meet everybody. I work for Rochdale Borough-wide Housing in customer engagement, and I was just curious. We're in the process of reviewing our engagement strategy, and I was just sort of curious to know. And you've talked a lot about language, Hannah, and that's really made me think in terms of how we sort of word the document and how we word our comms. But is there anything you do specifically for LGBTQ tenants to make them feel more sort of?
so I think we talk about it a lot. I mean, if I'm quite a visible exec in that way, so I don't hide that professionally or personally, and I think that's important. I want people to feel like they can come to us as an organisation. We actively promote things like Pride. We talk about the fact that we're involved. We go to, for us in Norfolk, that's Norwich Pride is the biggest one near us, to be honest. But what we don't want people to do is to feel like they have to disclose. We want people to feel comfortable if they want to. I think that we are very careful around the language that we use on our forms. I think we've just, I don't know if anyone was, but I did another one recently. We've just completely changed our engagement structure at Saffron, so this will form part of our new structure going forward. Like, actually, from a tenant perspective, are we truly representative across our stock portfolio? We're absolutely not. I can categorically tell you that now, that we're not representative, but we want to be. So it's about how do we engage different ideas, different values, different diversity of thought, which I think is really important. Like Cordelia touched on earlier, it isn't just about characteristics, it's about thought process as well. So we don't do anything overt. We just make sure that it's a constant narrative in the background where we talk about EDI. We do, we're part of the, I don't know if anyone's heard of the Human Talking Library. We've got a campaign called Flourish, which is about EDI and inclusivity. So they're all things that we do to try and enable our tenants to feel comfortable. But I come back, and I keep banging on about it, I come back to language. If your language in your forms is inclusive by nature, people will feel less uncomfortable when they are faced with discussing.
What they will also feel is more comfortable, because I've known it myself, and this has come from friends, partners, other people over the years. A case of, oh look, I can fill that in. You immediately just feel like, oh, cool, they've thought about it. Even
it
if
doesn't put your back up. You don't instantaneously feel defensive. That when that happened to me at the hospital that time, I instantaneously was pissed off. I was angry because I was like, for Christ's sake, like, we're in 2017. I am his mum. Like, this is ridiculous. Actually, why am I having to justify my existence to these people? And I think that that's what we need to get. So it doesn't make it offensive.
It's one of those inadvertent microaggressions.
Absolutely.
And the reality is that at Stonewater, we've been talking about microaggressions as like death with 1,000 cuts. So, you said sticks and stones may break my bones. Well, yeah, okay. So 1 microaggression is okay. Two you may get through, but 3, it's a big wound. And actually it can impact on your mental well-being and things like that. So it's about making sure that
it's
language is really used well, and is really considered, because even the unknowing microaggressions hurt. There is no distinction between I meant it and I didn't mean it. Yeah.
And it's like I said, it's almost, it's ignorance, but not intended ignorance. It's exactly that. It's this. And I went down and sat with the board recently, and this will be something which I think, Hannah, you kind of touched on there, to be honest with you. I went and did some coaching with the board. They were down in Gosport in Hampshire. Never been to Gosport before, but went down and immediately noticed it's a very, very, very white community. It is again, it's another naval city and the rest of it. And what you found is I was sat there at the board. There was one person on the board who wasn't white, and I was like, and I was talking about diversity. They went, well, we're struggling because of X, Y, Z. I said, diversity isn't just race. It isn't just gender. I said, look, you're great there, but how many of your community members are members of the Gypsy Traveller community? How many are members of the LGBTQ plus community? How many are disabled? How many are XYZ? Where is their voice on your board? And I kind of got this look. I said, when you're trying to look at next people on your board, you need to make sure you're empowering the voice of your tenants. If your tenants is that, they need to have someone on there who understands their voice. And you can only understand the voice if you've lived through it. You just can. I could never, my girlfriend's black. I could never pertain to tell her for a second what it's like to live as a black female growing up in Scotland in a very, very white place. But she can tell me, and I can understand that I can change behaviours or I can share a message. And that's how we need to come on. Denise, please do come in. Oh, we're still on mute, sorry.
Apologies for being late.
Don't worry.
The language has changed so much, though, in terms of LGBTQI. I'm 55. I was one of the founders of Stonewall a very long time ago as the chair, and I am working in housing, and I have to look up some of the terms that we use nowadays. And so, although we talk about microaggressions, we also have to understand how language alienates people. And as somebody who's older, and not in an environment which is of any sexuality at all, to actually have to suddenly work out that I'm actually cisgendered, you know, is kind of really strange. And it's how do we work this out for our residents, you know, and how do we make this language more accessible when it isn't even to us?
Denise, I think that's an excellent point, because I mean, unfortunately, I've got a 17-year-old daughter and a 14-year-old son, so I am constantly faced with new language and new words that mean completely different things to what they apparently meant the day before. It is helpful, and I find myself saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand what that means. But I think that's again coming back to this thing about actually helping people and let them ask the question in a safe space, so that we can make sure that we don't inadvertently do something without meaning to do it. You know, actually, I don't believe there are many people, there are a few exceptions in this world, that go out of their way to harm people. I think that is that, you know, that kind of indifference, that
exactly.
And I think that's where it's important, where we try to help and educate people, because, you know, education is a real key part of that. And I'm learning all the time how I don't identify as a lesbian female, I identify as a gay female, because I don't like the word lesbian. It makes me feel I don't like it. Now, for some people, now my friend Julie, who is a lesbian, she identifies as being lesbian. She wouldn't use the word gay because she believes that's a male term. So I think that, but that's a choice. That's a choice. My partner, she says, well, my wife, sorry, so partner's tell me off that. My wife would say that she fell in love with someone and it was irrelevant if I was male or female. So what does that make her? That just makes her Amy, and she just loves me. And I think that we have.
But there's a word for that as well, isn't there now?
Yeah, class as pansexual, I think, according to if you look at the definition. But I do take that point that actually we have to be prepared to learn. You know, because I'm still learning, and I'm part of this community, and I'm learning all the time. And I think that's again where it comes back to language and education, and just talking and having environments like this where people feel like they can share and discuss it, and including everybody in that. And that's, you know, Matt, it'd be great if we could have some of these and we had tenants come to these. How empowering would that be for us to listen to what actually they want from us? Because I don't think we understand.
Yeah, it's a good point, actually. I'm involved I work for Origin Housing, and I'm involved in their lesbian and gay, it's called Open. But, you know, it's all of the, I mean, I'm terrible with terminology, so I won't even try. And I was looking up our policies, a parenting policy, and we think we're really great, but I can see that I can bring something back to them about how we could improve it. And it's something I never even thought about.
And that's exactly
because the first thing it says is father.
Put these together. Yeah, the reason that we put these together, the reason that Hannah and I first joined one of these about a year or so ago, and then it's been on a few now. It's because the housing sector has so many people in it, but when voices come together, we can make change. And voices come together, and they're brilliant at doing so, but there aren't enough platforms for people to come together to talk about stuff that actually
good morning, you're speaking
needs
to
to be
Yasmin.
talked about. And so, oh, sorry, Yasmin.
Can you say that again, please?
Sorry?
Can whoever said that, can they speak again, please? I didn't hear them.
Yeah, it was Yasmin, and she's just gone again. So I'll come back to her in a minute. She's been on a few, so I'll get her back. But Hazel, let me bring you in.
Thanks, Matt. It was just leading on, really, Denise just mentioned a moment ago about Stonewall housing. And about a year ago, I actually went to, well, it was an online conference, and they did a presentation around LGBTQ+. And I remember some of the statistics. So when we're talking here about history and things evolving and things moving forward, what we haven't touched on at all, sorry, just so people know, I'm the homelessness lead for Bromford. We haven't talked about homelessness. And homelessness for a lot of LGBTQ+ is huge. You know, I mean, I've got some stats here that I've got on the screen. I've been trying to find them while I've been talking, but you know, that came from Stonewall, that 70% of those rejected from home because of their identity. 24% of young homeless people are LGBTQ+. We need to start at the beginning. We're all in housing to play our part in reducing and preventing homelessness. So we really need to bring this in from the very beginning of the story and be part of that evolution right through all the services that we deliver, right till somebody doesn't live in our home anymore for whatever reason, and make that just a normalized process with recognition all the way.
I think that's right, Hazel. I think that's shocking statistics. But I think, interestingly, the CIH president, Jo Richardson, have you seen, she's the CIH president, her charity this year is about ending youth homelessness. It'd be really good for you to link in with her, actually, and give her some
I am linked in with Jo already.
Oh, okay, because she's really working hard on that sort of thing, because those statistics are staggering. I mean, the 25%, that is, you know, that's just how I mean,
homelessness lead, Hazel, if that's obviously in this way your focus is at the moment, how is that? How are you trying to kind of combat's a horrendous term? I don't even know what the right term to use, but how are you trying to kind of be proactive, I guess, with the community to improve those stats?
Yeah, so I mean, we're not kind of proactive in that sort of way directly, not targeted enough at the moment, Matt. So we're trying to work on our EDI internally, I suppose, still at this stage, if I'm being really honest. And there's a lot of work to do there. So, but I think, you know, we need to start at the beginning of the journey, and people kind of forget the homelessness is why we all exist as the organisations that we are. And like you say, when those stats really come to life, that just kind of hits home with us that this is a huge group of people that are massively important, you know, that are probably being missed. I mean, there's going to be choices. We talked a really interesting conversation, you know, earlier on with Cordelia and Hannah talking about, you know, the choice element and you know, and it is very much a personal perspective on this. But are we doing enough?
I would suggest as well, there's a massive part to play for the education system within this, because we know that people who identify with LGBTQ+ are far more likely to have mental health issues. They're also far more likely to not attain well in school. They're also far more likely to fall out of the schooling system. And there's a direct link between education and homelessness. So I do think there's a lot of things that can be done around actually our early education and actually making people feel safe and content. You know, I think that's changing. I find it really refreshing that my 14-year-old son is in a class with a male who's now transitioning to female, and that's something that they're openly sharing and discussing. And actually, for a very rural county like Norfolk, that's actually that I never thought the day would come, I can be honest, that at 14 that we're in a space where that they could feel comfortable in a safe enough environment to do that. So the schools are changing, but I do think when you talk about right from the beginning, I don't even think that starts with the homelessness bit. I think it starts before then. I think it starts with actually how can we make sure that people don't feel this unwielding pressure that they have to kind of remove themselves from society, which invariably, unfortunately, ends up with homelessness. But I think it's a great point, Hazel. I'm really pleased you're linked in with Jo. She's fantastic. She's going to do some great work from the CIH perspective around that.
And thank you for sharing. I think I couldn't agree more there. And you know, when we look at so much of this, it is about identity, and identity is a massive one. And if you don't feel like, you know, we go back to homelessness and people talking to their parents or talking through school or whatever it might be, if you don't feel comfortable in your own identity, we have
a big part to play in that. You know, I went to get my children's shoes for the start of the new term. If any of you've got children, you'll know how awful it is when you have to go and get new shoes for your kids at the start of the school year. And I had to go and get them, and I went with my wife, and I went together, and we went to get Reggie's shoes. It was his first term at school, and the lady said, "What size is he?" And we both answered, and she went, "Which one of you's mum?" And then we both went, "I am." And then she went, "Well, which one's the real mum though?" And I went, "Sorry, can I see your manager, please?" And she was like, "Pardon?" I was like, "No, can I see your manager, please? Because as far as I'm concerned, we're both his real mum." "Do you mean biological? Are you talking about biology? Is that what you're talking about? Because we say that to an adoptive parent." And I find myself getting a bit more combative as I've got older because of terminology. But we have I believe I have a responsibility to help change that. That's my belief. That's changed over time. I used to shy away from it, whereas now I feel like I need to confront it. Because if I don't confront it, I'm part of the problem. I'm not willing to be part of the change, if that makes sense. But that's the sort of thing where, again, we need to kind of, as as a collective, as a group, there's power in numbers, there's power in voices. So let's make sure that we use our voices and we use them strongly, and we can help change and move things forward. You know, I believe actually, for me as a gay white female, my journey's probably been easier than some other people. I know, for example, I've got a gay male friend, he's from up north, from a very traditional army background. He's had a horrible time being a gay male. Like, he's been absolutely dreadful. He's had a far more tricky journey than what I would say I have had. And I think it's different for different people. We know culturally, some cultures find it much more challenging to accept people of same-sex relationships. So actually there's much more, there's different experiences even within the experience. You know, I think that mine's been relatively smooth. Sometimes it's been horrible, you know, it's been awful. But as a rule, I've been quite fortunate. But there are other people whose experiences will be far worse. And actually, how do we help those people? How do we understand the nuances within the own nuance, if that makes sense? Because there's many of those as well that we don't consider.
Couldn't agree more. Marie, let me bring you in because I saw you raise your hand there. So thank you for coming in today.
Hi everybody. I'm just picking up on Hannah's point actually, because I do a podcast and I do a housing week and an education week. And the new topic that we're looking at for this year is the future of the curriculum. So, and looking at the PSE lessons and how they can be more broad in terms of making sure that all of these elements are discussed. That has been a theme through when we've been recording, and I've been speaking to different education experts. So yeah, I think it always goes back to education at a young age and carrying that through, if you like.
No, I absolutely agree. Amy, no problem. You've got to leave. Completely understand. I'll make sure you get any last kind of points sent over to you.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
I think whenever we do these, education and communication is always at the basis of everything that we cover. And we've talked today about kind of trying to find ways to make that voice more inclusive and for people to understand, like, particularly tenants, but also internal staff to understand it's safe to talk about. One thing I was going to ask Cordelia, actually, just based on what you said before, because I didn't ask when you were talking about Spectrum. Does Spectrum focus on both tenants and staff's voice in terms of that inclusivity, or does it tend to focus one way or the other?
It was set up to give our LGBTQ plus colleagues a voice, but it links in with our customers. So there is an element, and on certain projects they tend to work together. But that's because of its growth and its decision as to where to go and how best to support the organisation. But initially it was set up like our other employee networking groups to give voices to some of our underrepresented colleagues within the organisation.
It's incredibly important to do. And I think when we're talking about housing as a sector, you know, this is the difficulty with the sector. It does split in two. You've got your internal side, but you've also got your tenants, and those voices do merge, but yet. Yeah, and we do give them an opportunity to get together and merge and to work together. So like last year for Pride, they had the opportunity to work together. They did things like we're COVID permitting, we're planning to actually get out to a Pride. So we wanted to have a Pride flag for Stonewater. So we had like tenants design one and colleagues design one, and made quite a big thing of it, so that will be our focus flag for when we do go out, rather than just using the Stonewater logo. So they have opportunity to work together and to share ideas and to support the organisation and tell us how to do best by our customers as well as our colleagues.
I think House Pride does a lot of good work around that, Matt. I mean, I don't underestimate House Pride and the work it's been doing. One of my most profound professional experiences when I was on it was Hanover at the time. They'd not merged, and we were at London Pride actually, and we took a lot of our residents who were in their 80s, and one of them had not come out until he was 70, and he sat on top of the double-decker House Proud bus and had the most amazing day, and he was just so delighted to have been included in part of it, because that's the other thing I would say, is that this, this is age irrelevant here. You've got a very vast spectrum. You've got people who have been severely persecuted when they were younger and would have had to hide away, still are very much part of our society at the moment. And actually, how do we incorporate, people that come out later in life? There's lots of things that we can do. And I have to say, it was a really profound professional moment for me, seeing this guy that he was just absolutely, he was so happy, and it was really moving. And I was like, yeah, that's what we should be doing. We've got it right. That's the sort of thing that we should be experiencing. That's what we should be enabling people to be part of, because up until that point, he'd never felt like he could, but we had created an environment where he absolutely felt like he could be himself and he could be part of something. And London Pride's incredible, to be part of it, to go to it, or to actually be in the parade. I took my daughter at the time, she was only 15. 14. She had the best day. She thought she was a film star. She was running up and down the streets, high-fiving people. It was incredible, but it was a really empowering moment for her, and equally a really empowering moment for this guy in his 70s, who all of a sudden could just be himself. And I think it is starting to change. We're starting to work side by side, but there's still an awful lot we can do to make people feel completely included. And I actually think we're a really powerful sector. And I've said this before, I think we have the real opportunity to really impact and change people's lives, profoundly change them. And I think we have a good platform to do it. And we should be using that to help in these particular circumstances. We've just got to get the messaging right. And we've sometimes got to be brave. And I think as a sector, we're a little bit reactive sometimes. But what I hope, when we do things like this and people start to talk about it, and Cordelia and Stonewall do the things they're doing, you've got Stonewall, you've got, Bromford, all these people doing it, that we start to be a bit brave and we put our best foot forward and don't be afraid. Because I think that, with risk comes reward. And we're never going to change the narrative if we're not prepared to confront it. And,
that's what I find that people who join these roundtables are willing to do. I think anyone who ever comes to these, they tend to be voices of change. And it's actually a bit of a shame today that I was the only male here. I would have hoped to get more male voices, but it's a bizarre one. Whenever I do a diversity roundtable of any of the 9 characteristics, it's always 90 to 95% female, and it's an interesting one. And I don't know, and obviously this is me coming from a white male, trying to kind of improve the narrative and raise the voice. And Marie's mentioned there that Ricky Burt at Midland Heart has always been very proactive with the organisation's attendance at Pride, which is brilliant. I think the Pride events are absolutely superb. I think it does give more inclusivity, but it's that continual narrative the rest of the year. We talked about LGBTQ History Month. I think the same happens with other important months. I think we talk about, Black History Month in America. A lot of places will post something at the beginning and then it will just go quiet over the month. Or Disability Awareness Month, it'll be, and then nothing will. It's what we're actually doing with that narrative is the most important thing. It's not just lip service. It's about actually trying to make change. And even if it is little things along the lines of making sure that it is tenant 1, tenant 2, that your voice, that you have something on a website, on a social media post, more than just once or twice a year, that is about the LGBTQ plus community in your businesses.
Wouldn't it be great if we got to a place in the world where we didn't have to celebrate in a month? Wouldn't it be the most utopian place to be, where we didn't have to have a month to acknowledge and celebrate something? And I appreciate that was never going to happen, but I would like to think that we're on the journey. I hate using that word, but we're on the way.
But I think for us, engaging with our community has been a real learning point. It resulted in us opening our LGBTQ safe space in Swindon.
Brilliant.
So it is ensuring that we're providing the best service for our LGBT community as well as our other communities is really hugely important.
And it's interesting to see some of the larger providers now providing LGBTQ plus extra care spaces that are predominantly for LGBTQ plus. So actually identifying that this is an actual area where we want to support people, because people don't feel comfortable being in an environment where they socially believe that they are different to other people around them. So I think it's really interesting. And Hanover have launched 2 schemes. I think they've got one in Manchester that they're now about to launch, and others have already done. I think Housing Care 21 have already done one. So I think it's interesting to see there is that changing space where people are trying to really consider what it is that our tenants want to feel safe and secure in their own home as they get older, but also equally on the polar opposite end of that, Hazel, when people are younger and they are facing homelessness, how are we making sure that those people feel safe and content and secure, and that we're making sure that we look after those individuals as well? Because I think it works both ways. And the thing is, with housing, we've got so much to do, we've got so many things to look at, that it can seem like it's an impossible beast, and you've got to go back to that kind of analogy of just taking little chunks at a time opposed to big ones, because we're never going to do it all in one hit, are we? But we can try to do
these things continue to make change.
Yeah.
Hazel has she sent a message to you, Cordelia, with her email address, just see if we can get a copy of the EDI calendar, which would be amazing. I'll email you as well, and I'll share that round. And then Claire, no problem at all. We're going to wrap it up anyway. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Hannah, thank you so much for
You're welcome.
your sharing on the personal side as much as anything else. And I'm hoping, as always, that these things will make change. I need to decide what to do with what I'm going to do regarding the gentleman earlier, because evidently that is on the recording, and I feel that he's calling out, because that's
Sometimes it's not a bad thing for people to see what other people have to confront.
It really is.
Would be my personal opinion, but I will bow to
I know
the
I was kind of going down the route of kind of maybe cropping a picture and saying, right, this happened, and this is exactly why these are so important. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Look forward to speaking to you all soon and seeing you next week. Take care.
Take care.